I'm here in Old Town Alexandria, and this is your guide to what you can see, do, and eat here when you visit Washington, D.C. Before we get to the specifics, hello, my name is Rob. I'm a tour guide and founder of Trip Hacks DC Tours. On this channel, I share my best tips, tricks, and hacks for visitors who want to explore Washington, D.C. This is the 5th video in my Washington, D.C. Neighborhood Guides for Visitors series. So if you dig this genre, make sure to give the video a thumbs up so I know there's demand for more. And check out the other 4 neighborhoods I've already covered, which are in a playlist that I will link to in the description. Let's start with a quick geography refresher. Old Town is a neighborhood in Alexandria, which is a city in Virginia. So this one is technically not in Washington, D.C., but it's still a popular spot for D.C. visitors. Now you can either stay in a hotel in Old Town, or you can come here from D.C. as a day trip. And my general advice on this is if you're going to spend more than half of your time in Washington, D.C., stay in the city. If you're going to spend more than half of your time in Virginia, then stay in Old Town and potentially go into D.C. as a day trip. So we're going to cover everything from where you can stay in Old Town, how to get here, what to see and do, and a few of my favorite places to eat. Now, like I said, Old Town is just one of many neighborhoods in the city of Alexandria. It is roughly defined as the area running parallel to King Street from the Old Town Metro Station to the waterfront, with a bit of additional land running perpendicular to the Potomac River. Let's start with how to get to Old Town, assuming that you're staying in DC and coming here as a day trip. The most practical and economical option for most visitors is to come on Metro. The King Street Old Town Metro Station is on the blue and yellow lines. One important thing to say is that Metro often does its track work on the weekends, and occasionally the section of Metro out here in Virginia is impacted by track work. So if you're planning on coming here on a weekend, I would highly recommend checking WMATA.com for upcoming track work to see what you're potentially getting yourself into. Probably the most fun way of getting to Old Town is on the water taxi, which you can take from the wharf. It runs most of the year, but does close seasonally during the winter months. Unfortunately, water taxi was recently purchased by a giant global tourism conglomerate and has kind of become more of a tourist attraction than actual practical transportation. And with a price that is much, much higher than Metro. So if you really want to ride a boat or get out on the water, this might be a great option. But if price is a major factor in your decision, it might not. If you're up for it, Old Town is a scenic bike ride from the National Mall. Just cross Arlington Memorial Bridge near the Lincoln Memorial, and then you can take the Mount Vernon Trail all the way here. There are plenty of Capital Bike Share stations around Old Town that you can use. You can take a regular taxi or Uber here from DC, no problem. And while I do not recommend that Washington, D.C. tourists ever try to drive their own car, if you must, there are about a dozen public parking garages around Old Town. The distance from one end of Old Town to the other is approximately 1 mile. And it's certainly walkable, and usually how I get around when I go to Old Town. But if you want to save some steps, you can use the free King Street trolley, which runs on King Street back and forth between the Metro Station and City Hall. All right, now let's talk about where you can stay. If you're only planning to come here as a day trip, you can go ahead and skip to the next section. When you're choosing a hotel in Old Town, the most important question you need to ask is, do you want to stay near Metro? Do you want to stay near the waterfront? Or do you want to split the difference and stay in between? The reason you might choose the Metro side is if you plan to use Metro to commute to DC. Or if you plan on using the Amtrak station, which is right next to the Metro station, for another day trip. For example, you could potentially catch a morning Amtrak train to Charlottesville, visit the University of Virginia and Monticello, and then catch an Amtrak train back to Alexandria in the evening. If you really want to experience the charm of Old Town, I would personally recommend choosing a hotel closer to the waterfront. I think the Hotel Indigo or the Alexandrian are both good choices on this side. But on the Metro side, the Hilton Old Town and the Embassy Suites Old Town are both a stone's throw from the Metro station. Now, let's talk about what there is to do in Old Town. Old Town is actually fairly similar to the Washington, D.C. neighborhood Georgetown in the sense that they're both old, historic port neighborhoods. They both have classic historic row houses, boutique shopping, and plenty of places to eat and drink. If you're physically able, I think walking the King Street Mile is a great way to introduce yourself to the neighborhood. If shopping is something you enjoy, there are over 100 boutique stores along the King Street Mile. And make sure to go down some of the side streets too for even more surprises. At the end of the King Street Mile, take some time to hang out here at the Waterfront Park. If you're hungry, there are some spots where you can dine al fresco when the weather's nice. Or just get a cup of coffee and walk around and enjoy it. If you like ships or naval history, you can tour the tall ship Providence. Providence is a replica of the first ship authorized to serve in the Continental Navy, so its history goes way back. Tours are run on the weekend, so make sure to check the schedule in advance if this is something you want to do. Nearby to the Waterfront Park is the Torpedo Factory Art Center. This was actually a munitions factory during both World Wars, but the building is now galleries and studio space for artists. You can watch artists at work, attend art talks, and even purchase original art if you find something you like. Even though Trip Hacks DC does not operate any tours in Old Town, that doesn't mean there aren't cool tours that you can take here. History tours, food tours, ghost tours. There are a lot of cool ways of exploring and learning about this historic neighborhood. Old Town has a few museums that you can check out. And while they're not as famous as the Washington, D.C. National Mall museums, they're still pretty cool. Gatsby's Tavern Museum is in one of the most important buildings from colonial times. Several prominent founding fathers hung out here at various points. The National Inventors Hall of Fame is located at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office and tells the stories of its over 600 inductees. And the Alexandria Black History Museum is in a historic building where you can go and learn about the history and culture of the local African American community. Now, remember how I said that I recommend staying in Old Town if you plan on spending more than half of your time in Virginia? So where else might you want to go in Virginia? Mount Vernon is a great place to visit if you're staying in Old Town. And it is a must-do if you're a George Washington history buff. But it's also a great historic site for anyone who's interested in U.S. history. Another potential day trip is out to Charlottesville and Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's home. Like I said, you could potentially do this as a train trip, but it's also about 120 miles away, so you could also do it in a rental car or your own car. Now, not everything in Virginia is necessarily historic. There are 2 theme parks nearby that you can day trip to from Alexandria. King's Dominion is about 80 miles away, just north of Richmond. And Busch Gardens is about 150 miles away near Williamsburg. I personally think Busch Gardens is superior for both quality of rides and overall vibes, but it's far enough away that you're kind of pushing doing it as a day trip. Now, back to Alexandria and a few of my personal favorite places to eat. And to caveat, I don't visit Old Town enough to have a comprehensive knowledge of the food scene here. These are just a few places that I like. If you can swing it, a food tour is a great way to try several different places all at once. And I will link to the food tour that I recommend in the description. Virtue Feed and Grain is tavern-style food in an 18th century granary. Chadwick's is a neighborhood pub that is often full of locals hanging out. Since one of my personal favorite guilty pleasures is fried chicken, the Rub is one of my favorites in Old Town. Spicy chicken and cold beer is quite satisfying, if I may say. If you're into Irish pubs, in my opinion, Old Town has a better Irish pub scene than even in DC. Daniel O'Connell's and Murphy's Grand Irish Pub are both excellent choices, especially if you're craving a pint of Guinness or a shepherd's pie. For coffee, my favorite is at Misha's, which is an Old Town staple. They somewhat recently moved into a new space on King Street. For dessert, Pop's old-fashioned ice cream and Goody's frozen custard are both excellent choices, especially on a hot summer day, or whenever you're craving something sweet. And like I mentioned, Old Town and Georgetown share a lot of similarities. So next, I highly recommend checking out my Georgetown neighborhood guide. Just go ahead and click or tap right over here to watch it next. Enjoy your trip!